I'm starting again. Here we go.
Are you all
Okay. Good morning. We're up to part 2 of the Bosi Legani of Tafshin Mem Aleph. So just to give a brief review of what we did until now, we're up to Perek Dalet. We'll put it up on the screen in a minute. In the first chapter, the Rebbe gives a brief overview, précis of the first 10 prokim of the Bosi Legani of Tafshin Yud, where he mentions that the Ika Shechina betachtenim Maisa, and the mission is to bring the Shechina back down. How did they do it then? They did it then with the mitzvah of making a Mishkan, v'asal Migdash v'shachanti b'seichel. And that is within each individual by turning our lives into a Migdash, and that brings the Shechina down into the Mishkan as well. And that is the process of doing that is by transforming the Sheker of the world into a Keresh, right? He explained that the Mishkan was made of Kroshim, of Matzei Shittim, and that is to transform the lie of the world into Keresh, to transform the Shtus of the world into Shtus Tikdusha. And then he ends off that first chapter here in Toshin Mem Aleph, that what the Friedrich Rebbe introduces at the end of chapter Yud, and that is that Bnei Yisrael are referred to as Tzivos Hashem. And the word Tzivos has three meanings. One is, it means an army. 2 means a designated time, and 3 means form. And that was what was discussed in last year's Maimer. But what's relevant now for this year's Maimer is that the name Tzvois says army. And then he brings from that the first time that it's used referring to the Eibishter himself is later on in Tanakh, and Tzvois is one of the names, one of the 7 names of the Eibishter which are not allowed to be erased. And when he explained, then he went on to explain in chapter Beis, he started explaining this, that just as Yidden are called Tzvois, and Yidden are Adam Elyon, so we are, as the Pasuk says in Tanakh and Yeshaya, so therefore, just we are, Adam means we are copies or examples of Elyon. So if we have Tzvois, so the Eibishter must also have a level of Tzvois. So what is the Eibishter's name of Tzvois? What does it mean? So it brings the Medrash, and Moshe Rabbeinu asked the Eibishter, Kisisa yastim hareinos kvedecha. So the Eibishter says, you want to know my name? Lefi ma'aseh nikra. Depending on what I'm doing, that's what I'm called. And he goes through a list of different names, and when I'm fighting wars, that is when I'm called Tzvois. And the Rebbe goes on to explain that the Resha, evil, is the opposite of Tzedek. The purpose of creation of the world is in order that there should be a world of Tzedek, but there is the ability for people to choose the opposite, to choose evil. When the Eibishter fights evil, that's when he's called Tzvois. Therefore, he says, the Friedrich Rebbe says, therefore Tzvois is a Shem Milchama. It's a name of a Milchama. It's a name of the Eibishter referring to Milchama, to war. Then he goes on to explain the Friedrich Rebbe that what is this Milchama? The Milchama is to overcome the opposition. He goes there to explain that Midas HaNetzach is a Midah which is embedded very deep within a person's nefesh. In fact, it's higher than all the Keches. And for that reason, when it comes to victory, to Netzach, the Melech, in a physical example, is ready to spend and splurge everything for the purpose of victory, even the greatest treasures that have been accumulated over many years and even many generations of previous kings. The king is ready to splurge and spend them all for the benefit and for the purpose of victory. And not just that, but even Mashlich is Chayav Mineged is even ready to put his own life on the line. And he says, and that's what's happening over here in this war. He uses the term, the Friedrich Rebbe uses the term that all of the Oineg and the Hanela, the tremendous pleasure and wondrous delight that the king has in all of these Eitzres are insignificant when it comes to Nitzuach, to winning the victory of the war. And that again is why, because the Maila, as the Rebbe explains at the end of chapter Beis, because of the Maila of Netzach, B'Sharshem, Mekerim, Netzach is rooted very deep within the person, within the Melech, within the person. But then he goes in Gimel and asks the obvious question. This all applies by a Melech Boss of Adam. This applies by a king of flesh and blood. That there is a menagid, that there's an opposition, and this opposition is able to bring out from within the Melech these deep this deep mid of Netzach. But the Eibishter is, as it says in Keheles, mi yemel matase. Who's gonna push around God? Who's gonna tell him and argue with him and then going to bring out the midas and netzach from the Eibishter? There is no opposition, and you need opposition in order to bring out the midas and netzach. So for that, he brings from the Marash in a Maimer of Tafresh Chav Zayin of 1867. Tzitkas Pirzoine. The name of the Maimer is on the pasuk Tzitkas Pirzoine. That's relevant because he's going to mention that later on as well. Over there in the Maimer, he says that when it says Netzach Yisrael, pasuk says by that Shmuel Hanavi says to Shaul HaMelech. Shaul HaMelech messed up then, and he wants to do tshuva, he wants to make up. So Shmuel Hanavi says to him that the Netzach Yisrael lo yishakav v'lo yinochem. The Eibishter doesn't change his mind, basically. Netzach Yisrael. So the Rebbe Marash explains that Netzach Yisrael, the simple pshat is, as the pasuk, the translation is Netzach Yisrael, the Eibishter is the eternal one of Israel. The Rebbe Marash explains that Netzach Yisrael is that the Nitzachin is of Yisrael. So meaning, says the Rebbe explains, that to start answering our question, that the Nitzachin of the Eibishter is not from his opposition. Taka, the Eibishter can't have any opposition. But rather is the Nitzachin of the Eibishter is when Yidden are having an opposition and bring out the Nitzachin within Yidden. That is the Netzach of the Eibishter, the Nitzachin of the Eibishter. As he says, that even though Lamaila it's not Shaykh the Inyan of Nitzachin, but Kivon Shesh Tzerech Be'inyan HaNitzuach B'Shvil Yisrael for Yisrael, so therefore there becomes a Netzach Yisrael also Lamaila as well. Why? Because Yisrael again are Adam El Elyin, and therefore we are, so to speak, in partnership with the Eibishter, and we're fighting the wars of the Eibishter here, and the Nitzachin for us is the Nitzachin for him, and therefore it brings about out even his Midas HaNetzach as well when it's challenging us as well. Okay, and that is where we are up to. So I'm going to put on the screen now Perek Daled, and we're going to continue from there. Okay. So now we know what the war is. We know who is doing the war, and we're going to be using the Midas HaNitzachin is going to bring out the Eitzer of the Melech. So now we need to understand what is the Eitzer of the Melech. Right, we're up to here Dalet. Well, now we need to understand what is this Eitzer, this treasure of the Melech, which is revealed for the benefit, for the purpose of Nitzachin in this war. The explanation is Kivur, but Teres HaMagid. Remember, I pointed out last week that the Mamorim of Bosi Legani, the Rebbe always quotes from all of the Nisim. So we just on the top of the page, we quoted from the Rebbe Marash, Tzitkas Perzene, we quoted before from the Alter Rebbe, now he brings in the Magid. The Magid explains regarding this idea of Eitzer of the Melech, Shebevadai Kesef is of Eini Nikra Eitzer Shel Melech. Gold and silver certainly is not the Eitzer of the Melech. Why? Kiman Echshavlei. What's it? The gold and silver is insignificant. An Eitzer, a treasure, the Eitzer is something, must be something which is the top. There is nothing more chashuv than it. And v'kivon shekesev is of any tev is mokem etzlei. And since gold and silver is insignificant by him, v'nechshav bein of kedavar achi poshet, and it's considered as something which is extremely simple, achi poshet. Therefore, it doesn't have to put it in a vault. It's not a treasure. That's not what you have a vault for. Because a vault is a place which is hidden and concealed. Certainly he doesn't have to put it into the vault of the king. Gold and silver is insignificant to him. So it's not something that he has to put in a vault, certainly not in the Eitzer of the Melech, because the vault of the king is even more vaulted, more hidden. It's even more secure and hidden than the Eitzer of an officer or even of an Adam Pashat, of a simple citizen. So what would be the Eitzer HaMelech? It can't be gold and silver. Rather, now, this can be learned, either it can be learned that it's talking about the Eitzer of the Eibishter, or it can even be learned it's talking about the Eitzer of a Melech Basav Adam, a king of flesh and blood. As we'll soon see when he's going to tell us what the Eitzer really is, the fact that a king is like a lot of gold and silver, that's really not the greatest virtue, the great mile of the king, that he has a lot of gold and silver. There's something much greater than that, because the gold and silver is not what makes him into a melech. So this can be referring to the Eibishter as well as to a melech, as we'll see now. So what is the Eitzer? It's certainly not his riches, his gold and silver. Elo, Eitzer shel HaMelech, hu hayira shekol hamedinas yirei mimenu. And he'll explain. The Eitzah of the Melech, in simple terms, is the fear. Let's translate Yiro for now as fear. The fear that Kol Medina, that all the countries under his rule are fearful of him. That is the Eitzah, the treasure of the Melech. What does that mean? What does it mean that that's the Eitzah of the Melech? So he says it's not the fear that's the Eitzah. It's v'hu tainuk sheloi. This is his tainuk. She'ein le tainuk yeseh gadol mizeh. That he does not have a tainuk greater than that. Then what? Then the fear, again we're translating it as fear now, of the citizens and of the countries to him. What does this mean? That this is his Eitzah. His Eitzah is not gold and silver, but his real treasure is the Yira that they have, and it's the subsequent tainuk that comes from this Yira. So he explains. This is the meaning of the pasuk Yiras Hashem Hi Eitzrei, that the Yira of the Eibishter is his treasure. So regarding this pasuk, it's a pasuk in Yeshaya. So regarding this pasuk, the Gemara says in Berachos, the Eibishter has nothing else in his treasure houses, in his vaults, other than a treasure of Yiras Shamayim. So this is bringing this as a proof text to what he's saying, that the Eitzah is not Kesev Izov, the Eitzah is Yira, and it's a Gemara. Yira is the main Eitzah, as it says in this pasuk in 41. Yiras Hashem Eitzah. So this is the Friedrich Rebbe continues to explain. What does that mean that Yira is the Eitzah of the Eibishter? The intention over here is not Yira. We're not talking about fear as we translated till now. Simple fear of punishment. That's not the Eitzah. What we would call awe. Yiras HaRemus is awe from the greatness of the Melech. That he's fearful of the king. In other words, he's embarrassed before the king because he appreciates. Why? He has tremendous busha to come close to the king because of the greatness of the king. This means that he appreciates who the king is. How does he appreciate who the king is? Because he understands the king. And the more one is able to be masik, to comprehend and understand the king, the more one will feel smaller and awestruck before the king. And that is the definition here of this Yira. Not a fear that the king can chop his head off and can punish him, but rather it's awe. Very big difference. An awe from the Eibishter, or an awe from the Melech Gashmi, the more one appreciates the Melech, the more awe one will stand before the Melech, the more busha. We can understand this very well. That's why the Yom Neroim, some people look at it as days of fear. Otherwise, it's translated as days of awe. A child, for example, a child is taught Yiras Shamayim, so he's taught, be careful, the Eibishter shouldn't punish you. And then what's meant to happen is that as we grow older, we're supposed to learn more deeper things and learn Chassidus and understand the Gadlus Hashem and the greatness of the Eibishter. And the more one appreciates and understands that, the more the Yira is going to develop into a mature Yira, the Yira that we're talking about over here, Yiras HaBeishes, not Yiras HaEinish. If a person doesn't do that, then he can be 50 years old and he still have a childish Yira of the Eibishter. And he's a very frum, but it's because he's frightened of the punishment. Yiras HaEinish. We have many stories like that.
So what's the Yira?
Yeah?
Hmm?
What were you saying?
So what's locked up in the... Can you hear me? What's locked up in the Eitzah of the king?
Hold on. Let's move on. We'll soon see.
We'll
soon see.
Yeah, all right.
So the Eitzah is this. So what is this treasure? Not the gold and silver, but it's the Yira. Why the Yira? So that's what the Friedrich Rebbe explains. So the Rebbe adds on V'yesh Lahisif to explain this. The Yira is not just a Yira that the people have a Yira of him. And then there's the Melech, and there's the Yira, and the Yira here we're talking about awe. And that's his Eitzah. But no, that is the Melech. Now this is a very important point that Rebbe's bringing out over here. The Yira is the actual Mitzias of the Melech. Without the Yira, he's not a Melech. The existence of the Melech, so to speak, the flesh and blood of the Melech, is Yira. That is his Mitzias. Why? It's a Sifri. The Pasuk says in Pasha Sheftim that you should appoint to yourself a melech. What does the Sifri define? What does it mean appointing a melech? What, he should take taxes? What exactly is the definition of a melech? So the Sifri says that his fear, his awe should be upon you. That is a melech. So the Rebbe is saying that the mitzias of the melech is the yira. So to answer your question, what is the oitzer of the melech? The oitzer of the melech is the yira, because that's what makes him into the melech. In other words, when we say that he's ready to give the oitzer, he's ready to give himself. That the Eibush is ready to give his very essence and being for the purpose of this nitzachon and this milchama. Once you,
how do you get from that to the physical oitzer? That's what I've got to understand. You've jumped saying that gold and silver by him is not so important. So it's obviously something else. Jewels probably, or whatever, jewel in the crown. But how do you jump from there to the yin of the whole business of the king of Shira? I mean, I understand what that means, but I'm talking about a physical oitzer now.
He says the physical oitzer is not what the physical gold and silver. That's not the oitzer of the melech. What's the oitzer of the melech? The oitzer of the melech.
Yeah, we call the oitzer of the king. He has a place where he locks stuff up, doesn't he?
No, that's the point we're saying over here. That's the whole point. That's not the oitzer. The oitzer is not his gold and silver. Even if a gashmi is the melech. The oitzer is the awe. That's, in other words, what makes a melech melech? It's discussed a lot in the Maimonim for Rosh Hashanah. What's the difference between making a melech or a meishel? A meishel.
I understand that. That I understand, but I'm trying to understand on the mashal.
The melech is not his gold and silver. The melech is not even his dominance, his power of dominance over the people. That's not what makes him into a melech. What makes him a melech?
Yeah, what he calls his oitzer is a physical oitzer. That's all. I understand what you're saying.
That's what you're saying. It's not that. The oitzer is, even by a physical king, what is really his oitzer is the relationship that the people have with the melech in their understanding and appreciation through their comprehension of who he is, and thus the very innate and basic relationship with him to the point of boishes. That's what makes him into a melech.
I understand that.
That's it. That's what he's saying.
Who said that the oitzer is mehusay shel hamelech? It's two different things. You have mehusay shel hamelech, and a separate thing is that melech has his oitzer.
No, we're saying over here.
Agreed.
We're saying here that the melech is ready to be mevazves his oitzer for the purpose of the war. So we define.
Yeah, that means he'll empty all his coffers, all his fortune he'll use to be victorious.
So what's the fortune? What's the fortune?
Now he jumps from one.
The fortune is oitzer shel yiras shamayim. That's the whole point. The second line. That is his oitzer.
I'm trying to understand as far as the king is concerned. How you jump from and they go on.
We're saying even that in the parentheses of the previous page, and even a physical king, it's also not the gold and silver that makes him the king. The gold and silver at most can make him in charge, can make him the boss, can give him influence.
Yeah, but he calls his oitzer. His oitzer is the gold and silver and stuff in his oitzer. He's got something in the oitzer which he locks up.
Okay.
So just to on top of Rabbi Jeffrey's question, how do you lock up Yira, this Yira Saboshis, and how are you mevazbis this Yira? I suppose in the Nimshal, how does that compare with the Mashal?
Correct.
Okay, so
it's gold and silver. We understand how you can lock up and how you can make available. But this
first of all,
Yira Saboshis is there all the time, regardless of how does it become? How are you mevazbis this?
Okay, so we're jumping ahead. First he's doing now so far is he's defining what is the oitzer. The oitzer is the yira. That is what the oitzer is, and he's explaining that. And he's explaining that by bringing the Sifri in number 43, that is the melech. That is not just something that we have to the melech we give him. That is the melech. Same tasa melech melech min shetei maso elecha. Umizeh move on sheshleimus hameluchahi. That the more shleimus the yira is, the more complete the melucha is. And then what is this yira? So he finishes off the paragraph defining yira is not fear. Yiras hareimemus, yiras habeishas. This is a yira of the greatness, the grandeur, which leads to habeishas. That is the treasure of the Eibishter. Now that level of relationship is what he's ready to be mevazviz. In other words, that when a Yid is going out into the world to fight the battle to achieve Dira B'Tachtenim, to fight the sheker of the Welt, and to fight the shtus of the world, what resources does that Yid have? The Eibishter is giving his very essence, and that's Mashlech Chayiv Meneged. Because what is the essence of the Melech? What we gave him, the Yira. So the Eibishter is giving us that essence in order to be able to go and fight. So we shouldn't feel small and weak and incapable. This is what the Eibishter is ready to give us to fight this battle. That's what he's trying to bring out over here. That when we have to go and battle the sheker of the Eilam, we are capable of doing it. Beautiful story. I reminded myself last week after the class. It's a Gishmak Maisa. We're talking about the sheker of the Eilam. So I heard the story that is Melech's third yahrzeit, Yites Cheshvan. So I heard this story. He was once on his way to the Eil. He used to go every so often. He used to go for Shabbos to the Eil. So the one who was taking him was talking with him in the car Friday afternoon. He asked him why he wanted to get something out of him. So he says to him, why are you going to the Eil for Shabbos? You can go to Crown Heights and down in 70 also. You can go to Rebbe's room and there was his medrash. He's trying to see what Melech is going to say, the difference between the two. So Melech says to him, Hezechain, he says, when I go to Crown Heights, I stay by my brother-in-law. And over there they give me a nice room with a nice bed. In Kiddush, they give me a silver becher with a tablecloth on the table, a nice comfortable chair, me'est, we eat out of china and cutlery, all's fine. He says, when I go to the Eil, so over there we sit on benches, I sleep in a room with a bunch of other chevra, and with plastic tablecloths and plastic forks and knives. I have to make Kiddush out of a plastic cup. I get up to go and wash. I come back, some Bachrim took my seat already. I'd have to go find another seat and find other Lechem Mishnah. He says, Das is amachor af Olam hazeh. He says, this is a protest on Olam hazeh. That's why I go. Because once in a while, it's very important that we have to make a machor on Olam hazeh. In other words, to realize the sheker of Olam hazeh. And for that, you need to do things. You need a sheker. The sheker of Olam hazeh is so dominant, it runs our lives, we don't even realize it. To be able to reveal this sheker and turn it into a keresh, that not just it's not a sheker anymore, but it's actually a keresh, it's part of the structure of the Eibishter's Dira B'Tachtenim. This requires a lot of energy. Where does that come from? So this is the Eibishter's Oitzer. What's the Eibishter's Oitzer? The Eibishter's Oitzer is created by our relationship with him. And by relationship, we mean by our understanding and appreciation of who he is, which causes a Yira of Reimamus. And this is the Yira. It's not a tangible thing. This is what the Eibishter is, the Oitzer that he's ready to splurge on us. In other words, that, based on this Sifri, the very etzem of the Melech himself. Because what is the Melech? A Mosai. That is what makes the Melech. As he says here, that is the actual mitzius of the Melech. So the more yira there is for the Melech, the more Melech there is. And therefore, shleimus hamelucha is when the yira is b'shleimus. Okay, we're just going to discuss that later on in the next chapter as well. So that's the best I can answer you to your question. So this is what the Frierdiker Rebbe explains there, predicate Aleph, and the Rebbe's explanation. Now the Rebbe's going to go and take it even further. He's going to do two added explanations. So we can add to this to explain this mile of Yira, that to further enhance our understanding that what is the Eitzer, the Yira. By quoting another Gemara. The Gemara over there says, similar to this Gemara in Brachas, but it brings a different slant to the different pasuk. The Gemara in Brachas spoke about Beis Gnozov in his treasure house. Here the Gemara says in the whole world he has nothing other than Yiras Shamayim. How do we know that? Shinem, as it says in Pashas Eikev, Moshe Rabbeinu speaks to the Yidden and he says, "V'ata Yisrael, Ma Hashem Elokecha Asher Mimach." Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Yidden, he says, "What does the Eibishter want from you already? All he wants from you is Kiyim Liyira. He wants you to fear him." So the Gemara brings that as a proof. This is that the Eibishter has all he wants is Yira. There's nothing else other than Yiras Shamayim. Then the Gemara continues, another pasuk, it's also written in Eiv, Vayemel Adam, he says to man, Hein Yiras Hashem hi Chachma. Behold, Yiras Hashem is Chachma, and then it says something else is Bina. So the Gemara says, so how's that a proof that he has nothing else in this world except Yiras Hashem? So the simple translation of hein is, as I just said, behold. That's how they translate in the English Tanakh. But the Gemara says, Shekain beloshen yevoni kein la'achas hein. In Greek, hein means achas, means one. So the simple meaning is behold, Yiras Hashem is chachma. But the Gemara says no. In Yoshavani, hein, the one thing that the Eibush has is Yiras Hashem achas. And what does Rashi say? Pinish Rashi, Yechida hi ha'yira ba'ilam. Yira is Yachid, is alone, unique in the Ilam. So Rashi already uses the word Yechida. The moment you say Yechida, in Chassidus, Yechida already equates to something much deeper than just alone and unique. We know Yechida is Yechida Shebenefesh. So the Rebbe takes that. That means the Gemara is telling us the Indian of Yiras Shamayim is the idea, the concept of Achas of one, the level of Yechida. Once you say Yechida, you're already talking about Mesiras Nefesh. In other words, this is the type of yira which is the way of Mesiras Nefesh. In other words, which yira is it, which we're talking about in the previous paragraph, which creates the malchus, which creates the melech, the metzius of the melech, a yira of beishes, we said, a yira of reimemus, to the point even of Mesiras Nefesh. So when are we contributing to the Eibishter, that Yira, which is contributing to his Oitzer? When Shavedasa hi k'may ish tzava, when a Yid is living a life like a soldier. Shin Yana, here in Mesiras Nefesh, the whole soldier's life is all about Mesiras Nefesh. Then, and here is part of the answer to your question, with this keach of the Mesiras Nefesh, which is the Yechida, which the Eibishter gives us, we're talking about Yechida Shebenefesh as well. That is the Eitzah that the Eibush is giving us. The Eibush is giving us a piece of him, of his very essence, which is the Eitzah which comes from our year of him. With that, we're able to be Menatzeach the Melchama. Where does Mesiras Nefesh come from? Mesiras Nefesh comes from the power of Yechidah that the Eibush gave us. So when a Yid lives his life, his or her life, like a Chayil, as he says, as the Ish Tzava, then we are able to use this resource of this yira in order for the nitzachon of the milchama. That's number one, which the Rebbe adds a beer. Then he continues, furthermore, that victory itself is linked and connected to yira. How's victory? We understand till that yira is what contributes to the Eibishter, and yira is the Mesiras, is Yechida, and Yechida is the Mesiras Nefesh. So it leads to nitzachon. But how does nitzachon come back and connect it to yira? This explanation is as the Balalula, the Frierdiker explains in the Durushi Chasana of the Rebbe's Chasana in 1928. Believe me, and earlier the Mittler Rebbe, and here the Rebbe is going to quote from the Mittler Rebbe. But before we bring the quote from the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe, he says in the brackets that the Mittler Rebbe says it on the pasuk Tzitkas Pirzonim Yisrael. We quoted before a Maimon from the Rebbe Arash on the same pasuk. The pasuk is a pasuk in Sefer Sheftim of the righteousness of Pirzonim Yisrael. So the Gemara says, Shalzeh Dosher Azal, what is the right of Pirzonim? So the Gemara says, Tzedakah HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael, that they wish to perform the tzedek, a kindness, a righteousness, a justice with Yisrael, Shepizron Lebein Umis, that he dispersed us amongst the nations. Yeah, Abi Yashakeach, the Eibishter, that we're all dispersed around the world, we're not at home as one family in Eretz Yisrael with the Beis Hamikdash. He did a kindness, he did a chesed, a tzedek. That's what the Gemara says. So he explains, this is also connected with Mashakaz Perazis Teshav Yerushalayim, the Nevuah and Zcharia, that the Yerushalayim, one of the prophecies is going to be that Yerushalayim is going to be a city where it will no longer need walls around it, so it will be able to be spread out. Perazis, this is alluded to in this pasuk in Sefer Sheftim of Pirzayne Milashon, Perazis, Veloy Pizrayne Milashon Pizur, not Pizrayne in the sense of Pizur of dispersion. But in any case, that's just the context of the Maimon. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says in the Maimer Dushi Chasana, and the Mittler Rebbe says in Teres Chaim, they explain Bepirush Maimer Azal. They explain the Maimer Azal in Broches. Over there it says that the Vahanetzach, the Pasuk says in Divrei Hayamim, Vahanetzach zu Yerushalayim. So the Gemara says, or opinion that Netzach is Yerushalayim, or the building of Yerushalayim. So the Gemara says, the Gemara says the Indian Yerushalayim who kedisa b'medrash. Sorry, that's Vanetzach is the pasuk, and the Gemara says that's Binyan Yerushalayim. So they explain the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe, the Indian Yerushalayim who kedisa b'medrash. What's Yerushalayim? Okay, so just he's jumping from one thing to the next. What is Yerushalayim? Netzach is Yerushalayim. Now, Netzach is relevant for us because that's our whole subject over here. We're trying to understand the connection of Yira to Netzach. So we understand the meaning of Yira to Netzach by using a mimer from the Frierdiker Rebbe and of the Mittler Rebbe. That what the Gemara says that Netzach is building of Yerushalayim. So they explain what's the connection of Netzach with Yerushalayim. The Indian Yerushalayim could be medrash. What is Yerushalayim? Yerushalayim is like a medrash. The medrash explains, and it's Huva B'Teisvis, and the Teisvis brings that Yerushalayim is a composition of two words. What is the meaning of Yerushalayim? Shenikra al Shem, on one hand of it, the first part of it is al Shem Avram. Avram gave the first part of the name. Shekra'u Har Hashem Yirah. In the Akedah, when Avram Avinu came to, and Yitzchak asked him, where are we going, what are we doing? He says, we're going to go to the place Har Hashem Yirah. Or later on, he called it Har Hashem Yirah, the mountain where God is revealed. What was it called until then? The city was already called Shalom beforehand, as it says in Pashas Lech Lecha, Kidiksiv Malki Tzedek Melech Shalom. So if you put, so it's already called Shalom. So you put Yira and Shalom together, V'lachei Nikra Yerushalayim, Al Shem Yira, V'al Shem Shalom. For the Yira of Avram and the Shalom in Pashas Lech Lecha, so you have Yerushalayim. In other words, what is Yerushalayim? A composition of Shunian Shleimus HaYira. Yerushalayim is the completeness, the perfection of Yira, of awe. And where is the manifestation of completeness of Yira? Where do you see the completeness of Yira? Varei Shleimus HaYira, Yira Shemei L'dei Mesiras Nefesh, Begoli, B'maisa B'Payil. The Shleimus of Yira is a Yira which leads to Mesiras Nefesh, Begoli, and B'maisa B'Payil, in reality, in action. Not just a theoretical Yira, a theoretical Mesiras Nefesh. Shleimus of Yira is an actual Mesiras Nefesh, B'maisa B'Payil. Mesiras Nefesh does not automatically equate to death. Mesiras Nefesh is that, as we learn in other places, it means that we're ready to be Moisa our Nefesh, Mesiras Harotzin, to do what Eibishter wants, even when it's not comfortable and not convenient. Together with transforming the sheker of the world and the shtus of the world, etc. It's a whole big package. So that's the connection, he says, of Yira of Netzach with Yira. That's a connection of Nitzochen is connected with Yira. Now,
what's happened to him?
Say that again.
A bit.
Uh-oh. Can you hear me? Hello?
Now we can speak again.
Okay.
Yeah, you're there now. You missed a couple of minutes.
A couple of minutes. Did I finish the paragraph?
You're in the middle, aren't you?
Oh, I didn't finish the paragraph with you. All right, so let's turn it back to the top of the page. Right. So where we have so therefore it's called Yerushalayim because Yira of Avram Avinu, and it's called Sholem.
That's you're up to. You said Yerushalayim is two words. You said.
Oh, so Sholem, right? So it's called Yira because of Avram Avinu and the Akedah Hashem Yira, and then the Yira is already called Sholem by Malki Tzedek, Melech Sholem, Pashas Lech Lecha. Therefore, it's called Yerushalayim. Al Shem Yira Al Shem Sholem. That's the medrash. So he explains, this is, in other words, that Yerushalayim symbolizes the Shleimus HaYira, the completeness of Yira. What is the completeness and perfection of Yira? Shleimus HaYira HaYira shemivia l'dei Mesiras Nefesh. The completeness of Yira is a Yira which leads and brings to Mesiras Nefesh. And which type of Mesiras Nefesh? Mesiras Nefesh Begoli. And what type of Mesiras Nefesh Begoli? B'maisa b'Payil. Now, Yira doesn't automatically equate to death. Mesiras Nefesh doesn't automatically equate to death necessarily. Mesiras Nefesh is that, as it says, Mesiras Harotzin, that I'm able to, not just in an extreme situation ready to die for God, even more difficult is to live for God every day and every moment of every day. That is the Mesiras Nefesh Begolim B'maisa B'Payil. And therefore he says, this is, as he says at the beginning of this paragraph, this is the connection of Nitzochen with Yira. That when is there the victory? When there is a Yira Sholem, that brings out the highest levels of Nitzochen because that's Mesiras Nefesh. So it all ties together. Okay. Hey. Yeah, you all with me? Yesh Leisiv was so we can add, the Rebbe says we can add to this as well. to this idea of nitzacha in this idea of shleimus hayira that we just spoke about is connected with the whole general idea of yira, beginning with the different levels in yira. Hachel miyira tata, beginning from small yira, the lower level of yira. What's the lower level of yira? Till now we're talking here about a yira which is awe, right? But doesn't take away from the simple meaning of yira, which is fear. That's called yira tata, the basic fear of the Eibishter. Kiyidua, as is known, shehi yira tata is chad, is one with shleimus hayira. Yira tata is part and parcel of the complete yira. In fact, we met a boy in the shleimus hayira. That's where the complete yira comes from. It's got to start somewhere. So when a child, we used earlier the example of a child. When a person has a childish yira, a shallow yira, that's a good place to start. The problem, what I was mentioning earlier, was that that's the place to start and that's where it remains for the rest of one's life, that childish type of yira. But it's definitely the beginning. So, Klolos HaYira begins, this is connected with Klolos HaYira, which begins with Yira Tata. The explanation is, the Pasuk says, the Pasuk that we quoted earlier about Netzach, about the Netzach Yisrael, that the Eibishter's Netzach, his victories, we explained this.
We lost you again.
Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know what to say. I have full bars. Can you hear me now? What's now? Tell me when I'm back again. Can anybody hear me? No? Okay. This pasuk that we quoted earlier from that Shmuel Hanavi is telling Shaul that it's too late because Netzach Yisrael will not change his mind. Basically, this pasuk is never going to get Lamailas Malchus David. I feel like Malchus Shaul. This pasuk is talking about the Maila of Malchus David, even over Malchus Shaul. That he Shegam Hu Nikra Mashiach Hashem. V'nimshach Hashem in Afarsamin. When he was called Mashiach Hashem, and he was also anointed with the oil of the Afarsamin, as the Gemara says in Huriyas. So the pasuk is referring to David HaMelech. So what does that tell us? We can extrapolate from this that the Indian of Netzach Yisrael that we said earlier, that is Ma'ir, the Etzem of the Melech, Shema'ir Betzem HaMelech, Be'emikes and Mechaya HaMelech. This idea that the Netzachin of Yisrael, in other words, when Yidden are challenged, and Yidden are working to overcome that challenge, to bring out the Netzach within themselves, that is Ma'ir in the Etzem HaMelech, we said. That's Ma'ir Be'etzem HaMelech, Be'emikes are even deeper than Chaya HaMelech. Where do we see that most illustrated? That's in Malchus David Dafka. We see that in Malchus David. This Netzachin of the bring out the Netzach of the Eibishter. What's David? Yonashal David is Nemar. It says Neuma Geber Hukam Ol. So it's a pasuk in Shmuel where we're there. David HaMelech, it's talking the end of his life. The last words of David. David HaMelech is saying a poem, and he's giving his the last words of David. So he says Neum, the speech Hagever of the man Hukam Ol, who has been raised all above. Right? He was a shepherd and he was the youngest of the sons. So he refers to himself as the man who was Hukam Ol. So the Gemara says, what is another meaning of Shehukam Ol? Not all, Kometz Aleph Lamed, as it is in the pasuk, but oil. Shehekim Oila. The Gemara says, Hekim Oila Shel Teira. Shehu Inyan HaKabbalah Seh. In other words, David HaMelech is Inyan of Kabbalah Seh. So now, if this pasuk of a Netzach Yisrael is referring to, as we just said, to David HaMelech, and what David contributes, what was David's contribution? Kabbalah Seh, the Gemara says. So what does that tell us? V'hainu that the aveda of nitzachin, of netzach, is not an aveda which is mitzad havon of hasaga. Not even afilu loy beivin shel archevis anor, not even a havon of hasaga, a very broad havon of. It's in other words the aveda of David HaMelech is not an intellectual based aveda. The nitzachin is not going to come from just havon of hasaga, even the archevis anor. And he says, what's a Chevis Anor? Shezeh and Yoshel Shol, Chevis Anor. Then the Parshas Vayishlach, you have the kings of that come from Esav. So one of them is Shol from Chevis Anor, the other side of them from the Chevis Anor. And he brings from in 68, he brings from the Eitz Chaim. In Kabbalah, they speak about what's this different levels of Hasaga, Hasaga, Bina, whatever. So he's saying that the Nitzachin is from Kabbalah's Eil, because David HaMelech is Eil. And the Pasuk of Netzach Yisrael is talking about David HaMelech. So the Nitzachin is going to come from Kabbalah's Eil, not from Havana Vasaga. Not even great Havana Vasaga. Rather, where's the Nitzachin going to come from? Elabeif and Kabbalah's Eil Dafke. Dafke for Kabbalah's Eil, which is not Havana Vasaga. As we see that Shmuel Hanavi himself says to Shaul over there, Shaul, remember the story with Shaul? He saved some animals and he says, he thought he can use them for karbanos. So he says the famous words, Shmuel Hanavi says to him, Hine Shamaya Mizevach Tev. That the Eibishter appreciates Shamaya, much listening. Mizevach Tev, much more than a nice zevach, than a nice barbecue. Lahakshiv is much greater, to pay attention and to listen to instructions is much greater than Chaylev Eilim, than the fat of beautiful animals. Kabbalah's Eil is most important. You had a good reason, you wanted to save the animals, all very nice, but the Eibishter wants Kabbalah's Eil, and that's much more geschmack to him than a good family barbecue. So for this reason, because David is the symbol of Kabbalah's Eil, that's why his Malchus was the eternal Malchus, Malchus Amitis. Bedugos Malchus Elam Shalamayla, similar to the Eibishter's Malchus, because of Kabbalah's Eil. So now he brings from the Rebbe Rashab that this is also, he brings it from the Ayin Beis, and the Bukam is that the Indian of Netzach Bavedis Adamu Shemenatzeach Ba'atzmai. What? So now the Netzach, the Nitzachin is Kabbalah's Eil. What is the greatest Kabbalah's Eil? The greatest Nitzachin is when a person is able to be Menatzeach oneself. I'm able to be victory over myself. What is victory over myself? To do something, to go and do something even when be'etzem I don't want to do it. It's my nature doesn't want me to do it. Or in fact, even a gam lasis hepech, or even to go against my nature. There's one thing when my nature I don't want to do it. Another thing is actually goes against my nature. But to do it anyway, b'derech nitzuach. In the way of nitzachin. And then he goes even more than that. V'inyan hanetzach. Even though Netzach is really, we said earlier that Netzach reaches into the embedded even higher than Keches HaNefesh. But on the other hand, we know that Netzach is Madrega Yeseh Tachtena because why? Because Lebar Migufa is the expression that Eitz Chaim uses. What do you mean Lebar? It's outside of the Guf. The other Midas, well, let's look at it this way. Netzach, you need an enemy. There has to be someone over whom you menatzeach, otherwise you're going to be menatzeach. Now, if you'll ask, the Bar Mitzvah Maimer, he says over there that Chesed, you also need somebody else. Right? While Chochma over there, he contrasts Chochma and Chesed. That Chochma, you can trachten Askola Bazich, yeah? Remember the Bar Mitzvah Maimer? But Chesed, you need to have someone else with whom to perform Chesed. But the Chesed itself is a kindness that one has, and then you need someone else to express the kindness. Nitzachin can only be when there's an opposition. Otherwise, the element of Nitzachin doesn't wake up. There's an opposition, and I have to be victorious over that opposition. So it brings out the midah of Nitzachin. We used last week the more common example that people have of midas and Nitzachin is when it ruins people. People have a breges, people have a faribel, and they allow that to destroy them, and they eat themselves up from inside. You can't have that sentiment if you don't have who to hate. If no one offended you, you're not going to be able to feel. You're not going to have a breges. If you're going to use such a mundane example. So Netzach is a midah, which is lebar migufa. So on the one hand, he says Netzach is madriga yes tachtein lebar migufa. But there is a kosher it's connected and it touches, it awakens, it arouses very high levels. He brings that from the Tzemach Tzedek. This is going to give you a few lines of Kabbalah, don't worry. You should maybe back goys look at the Tzemach Tzedek brings it and his goys to look at the Torah. The Pirush maybe goy of Nevineim. So over there, the Tzemach Tzedek says the Koi that maybe goy of Nevineim is referring to Netzach and Haid. This is connected with Kel Elyon, which we say in the first bracha of Shemon Esrei. Kel Elyon maybe goy of Nevineim. The Koi that refers to Pchinas HaKeser Ukid Isa Bezoyar Shinyan. A Netzach kosher and Metzach. That the Netzach is connected with, not just because they rhyme, but Netzach is connected to Metzach, which is the forehead, which is a Hamshacha from Meichas Timo, Pchinas Atika. Okay, whatever that means. Metzach, the forehead is a Hamshacha from the hidden Meich in the brains of the level of Atik of Keser. Okay, what does it mean in practical? What's the Tzemach Tzedek saying here? So Netzach is connected. We just said that Netzach, even though it's Labar Migufo, it's connected to the highest level. What's the highest level? So in Kabbalah, he says he brings from the Tzemach Tzedek. It's connected to Atik, which is the highest level of Keser. What does it mean in practicality? That this ability to be able to have a nitzuach of victory, to even go against my own nature, is leirak binyan shu hepech haseichel. It's not just to do something which is against my seichel, or something which is hepech haregesh opposite against or opposite my feeling, and hepech kol keches of agluyim, and against opposite, counterintuitive, even to all of my revealed keches. But even counter elogam hepech hateva should be a Kadosh Baruch Hu, even against the opposite of the nature which the Eibishter himself put in me. In other words, a teva de kedusha. Even to go against my Teva de Kedusha. What is Teva de Kedusha? The general anhoga of Nefesh Hashenis B'Yisrael, which is a chelik kamim al namash. All of those things which come natural to us as a result of our neshama, we can even have a nitzachin over that. What does that mean? We'll soon see. The genuine, real Inyan of Mesidas Nefesh, which means Mesidas, includes Shekel Gam Mesidas Nefesh de Kedusha. Even in Mesidas Nefesh, over in Kedusha itself, over other parts of Kedusha. Lotzei Sugama Metzonim Gvulin de Kedusha, to go out of one's limitations of Kedusha limitations. Forget about going against the Yitzhara, against the Nefesh Abamis, against one's physical Teva. We're talking here about even about the going against the Teva of the Nefesh Elokis. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean to go against the Teva of Nefesh Elokis? So I was thinking, this is a story that the Rebbe himself said in the Maimon of Bosi Legani. Now it's coming up to 70 years of the first Bosi Legani. The Rebbe there tells the story that Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek was going to shul, and someone came up to him and asked him for a Gemilas Chesed. And before davening, you're not supposed to deal with money. You're not supposed to talk about money. Maybe you're allowed to fundraise. I don't know. But other than that, so the Tzemach Tzedek says, "Fine, I'll give you a Gemilas Chesed money as soon as I finish davening." He comes to shul to daven. He suddenly dawns on him. He put on his talis. He put his talis over his shoulder. I think the story was. He realized that he's going to wait till I finish davening. Meanwhile, it's the market day. It was Yid. Half the day he's going to go. He's going to miss all the opportunities. So Tzemach Tzedek took off his talis. He went to the market. He went home to get money. He went to the marketplace. He found this Yid and he gave him the money. He came back and he put his talis back on. The Alter Rebbe came to visit him. This was, I think, right after the Shloshim or in the Shloshim, after the Alter Rebbe passed away. That was Mesidas Nefesh over in Yom of Kedusha. Because in Yom of Kedusha, what do you mean? Now's not the time for money. It's before davening. Before davening, we don't deal with money. But he had a Mesidas Nefesh over in Yom. That's an example of Mesidas Nefesh over in Yom of Kedusha. So you'll say that was the Tzemach Tzedek. There was a Chassid, Rabbi Jaffe, you remember him, his name was Rabbi Yechina Gordon. He was the Gabbai of 70. Very clever man, with a good sense of humor as well. Rabbi Yechina Gordon was the Menahel of a Gemilas Chesed. Gemilas Chesed Shemrei Shabbos. The Rebbe used to every Shabbos Mishpatim, used to call up him, or later on his son-in-law, Shimon Goldman, used to come and tell a story, put on a shtreimel. Anyway, Rabbi Yechina Gordon was in charge of this Mesidas Nefesh. Somebody, I think it was Reb Chaim Tashkenter, once wanted to play a trick on him and see what he's going to do. Rabbi Yechina Gordon was in the middle of Birchas Krishma. And he comes up to him. He made like he didn't know where he was up to, and he says, "I need a loan." Rabbi Yechina Gordon instinctively closed the siddur, took out his pen. Okay, how much do you need? He felt very bad. He realized this was the first instinct of a chassid. This was a Mesiras Nefesh over in Yonam of Kedusha, even over in Yonam of the Neshama of Nefesh Hashenis B'Yisrael, as says over here. That is Amitis in Mesiras Nefesh. Mesiras Nefesh is the Kedusha. Lotzeis Gam Amitzorim Ugvulim the Kedusha. Those are two examples that come to mind to be able to free ourselves. Even Kedusha can sometimes become limitation. Kedusha. I have to daven, whatever. I can't do this. I have to do that. I can't because I'm busy with something else, which is a heilige thing. So he says that's the Indian of Yitzias Mitzrayim. And why is it significant? That's the Indian of Yitzias Mitzrayim, to go out of the Mitzorim of Kedusha, because that's when Yidden were called Tzivis Hashem. Shavedosim Mikma Yish Tzovash and Yonim Mesiras Nefesh. Now here, this part I don't understand. He says that's the Indian of Yitzias Mitzrayim. How did Yitzias Mitzrayim begin? Shehiskal Idea Yitzia L'mayla Ma Mitzorim of Gvulim de Kedusha. Because Yitzias Mitzrayim began by the Yidden themselves breaking themselves free from the Mitzorim of Gvulim of Kedusha. And therefore, therefore they were able to break through the physical limitations of Mitzrayim, and there was Indian Yitzias Mitzrayim Kipshuta. And there was the whole Indian Yitzias Mitzrayim. What was their Yitzias Mitzrayim and Gvulim of Kedusha? That I don't know. We know it's explained another. The Rebbe explains that the Mesiras Nefesh of those 4 days from Yud Nisan until Yud Aleph Nisan, we had to tie the lamb to their bed. It was a tremendous Mesiras Nefesh because the lamb was the Avodah Zarah of Mitzrayim. Maybe that's what he's referring to, that they had to have a Yitzia L'mayla Mitzrayim Gvulim of Kedusha. In any case, the point what he's saying over here is that right. So he's saying over here, this is the ending of Yira. We start end of the previous paragraph of Yira B'Shleimus. So he says, what is the ultimate of Yira? Yira is Mesiras Nefesh. Oil, David HaMelech. Right? And that is the end of Kabbalah Seil. Kabbalah Seil is what's going to bring Mashiach. Kabbalah Seil, not just Havana Vasaga, not even tremendous Havana Vasaga. And the Mesiras Nefesh, even the Mesiras Nefesh, not just against the powers of evil. Mesiras Nefesh, even over myself, and even over the powers of Kedusha within myself, to overcome even my powers of Kedusha. That's the Mesiras Nefesh. That's what's going to lead to the Nitzachim. Hine, Sinas, so this is the Eitzer. So now, have we defined what the Eitzer is? The Eitzer is the Eitzer of Yiras Shamayim, which means the Eitzer of this intense relationship that we have with the Eibishter, which is the awe. And the Eibishter is revealing to us all of this, in order that we should be able to, this revelation is what brings about that we should be able to have a Mesiras Nefesh. So we should be able to have the Nitzachim. So he's revealing the essence of the Eibishter, which is symbolized by the Midas HaNetzach, which we said is embedded in the highest levels. The purpose of it is, as we said, is for the purpose of Netzach. That we should be able to win this war. Because this is something which touches the very essence of the Eibishter. In the physical example, something which is even more significant than the life of the Melech. Now, how does that translate in the Eibishter? What's the whole purpose of creation? And the diuk over here is that the Eibishter didn't say he wanted a dinner b'tachtenim. He thought of a dinner b'tachtenim. Nisave daike. The specific over here is a taiva. And what's the taiva? As the Alter Rebbe said, a taiva is kinkasha. Once you classify something as a taiva, you can't ask questions anymore, because a taiva is not something that can be rationally explained. It's beyond. It's higher than questions. It's like asking what color is the taiva. It's a ridiculous question. It doesn't have a color. You can't ask why either, because it doesn't have a why. It's higher than kushis. It's not in the category. It doesn't live within the gather of questions. Question means concealment, and then there's a reveal and answer. It's not that type of thing. It's like I said, like a color. So this idea, this is the goal. To reveal this highest level of nisave, this is what needs to be nimshach down to the tachtin. Because down here is what the ikar of the Eibishter was, as it says in the beginning of the Bosi Legani. How far must we bring this level of the Eibishter of symbolized by nisave till tachtin shein tachtin l'matar. And for this purpose, that's why the neshama came down from a high city down into a deep pit. In order to do the avodah of the neshama, not in theory, but in maisa, in action. The deed is the main thing. Because maisa is there's mashava, and there's dibur, and then there's maisa. Maisa is the lowest of all. And that's what the neshama came down into this world to do it. By the Yeridah through this Yeridah of the Neshama, that's how there is achieved the Aliyah of then to where we be able to reach a level which is even higher than, not just higher than from where it came down from, higher than up and down even. And that is when the tachta becomes a dira, similar to the dira of a person, similar to the dira where a person lives. The person is there with his entire atzvos, his entire being. When you go out, when you go on Zoom, when you go to meet other people, it's already no more the real you. You have to dress a certain way, look a certain way, talk a certain way. The real you is only when you're in your own abode, in your own dira. And that's what's the goal over here, that the Eibishter should be able to reveal himself down here as his personal dira. Not just the chayas hagolu should be revealed, but the etzem achayas of the Eibishter. All of this is achieved jointly together throughout our history, throughout all of our work and effort, throughout the times of Golos. Because during Golos is when we need a Melchama. This is the exact opposite of the pasuk that says that the beauty of man is sitting in the house. when you have a nice house, a nice furniture, and everything is nice and fine. But rather, ela adarabah. That's not good. Living in a nice house is not going to achieve this victory. But on the contrary, Eres Tzia, we have to feel and appreciate that we're living in a dry and parched land. Eres Tzia, as the Pasuk in Tehillim says, She'oz nase maimed umatzav detzoma lacha nafshi kama lacha b'sori. In Eres Tzia, when one is in a dry and parched land, that's when we feel a thirst of tzoma lacha nafshi kama lacha b'sori. My soul thirsts for you, my flesh yearns for you, and he brings a veyavot to the Baal Shem Tov. We didn't do the Baal Shem Tov yet. The next pasuk. What is Kein B'Kedesh Chazisicha? Simple meaning is that B'Kedesh in good times, in holy times, I was able to see you. But now I'm in a dry and parched land. David HaMelech is thirsty for the Eibishter. So the Frierdiker Rebbe Balul brings a finish with the Alter Rebbe in the name of the Baal Shem Tov. That what B'Kedesh Chazisicha means Halavai B'Kedesh. That what? That Halavai, when I was in good times, I should have such a thirst and yearning for the Eibishter like I did when I was in bad times. The Rebbe used to speak about it sometimes with the Russian Yidden. In Russia, they were able to have Mesidas Nefesh and everything. Where did that Mesidas Nefesh go when they came out of Russia? Where did that passion and that drive go? We're living in comfortable lands, they're living in Eretz Yisrael or New York, and where did that Mesidas Nefesh go? Halavai B'Kedesh, says the Baal Shem Tov. Halavai that B'Kedesh, Keshedim Tzoyin Beretz HaKedesh, Hepech, Eretz Tziv Oyev, the exact opposite of a dry and parched land. Halavai there, Chazisicha, I should see you, B'Tshuka G'doyle, with such a great yearning of Tzoma L'cha Nafshi Kam L'cha B'sori, as it was Beretz Tziv Oyev. So living a comfortable life is nice, but that's not what's going to make it happen. We're not looking to impose upon ourselves suffering. He's talking about that ruchni is dikka. We should appreciate and realize that ruchni is dikka, dryness and parchness. But Gashmius, Baruch Hashem, life is good. But we should realize that life is no good, because over there is a snake and a serpent and a scorpion, as the pasuk says in Ekev. We got to deal with things which are the opposite of a likus, and to to restrain them, ultimately to transform them. All of that requires the awakening of our midas and tzachim. The Rebbe does not want us to be comfortable. He says that's the theme of this Maimer of Bosi Legani all these years, every year from a different angle. Not to be comfortable, not Gashmi is uncomfortable. That in our minds and in our hearts, not to be comfortable with the status quo. When you have Yisraelus, Midas does not just not tolerate the Menagid, but it wants to do something about it. It wants to fight with the Menagid. And win him. And that is not to be intimidated by all the different rationales and so on. Don't be embarrassed what someone else will say, but rather do everything you're capable of doing with this awe of the Eibishter, to even to the highest level of Yira, which is in Yira Mesidas Nefesh, as we said earlier in Sif Dalet. Meaning that the Aved has to be like a soldier. The soldier is goal oriented and knows no other chachma is done what has to be done. Mesidas Nefesh. There's nothing greater than that. As a result of that, we're going to achieve a corresponding a corresponding corresponding to our Yisurusa Delatata. That's the whole purpose, he says in the brackets, why the Eibishter gave us the Eitzah. We're able to awaken this Indian of the Tzach and Lamaila, where the Eibishter's name of Tzvois, and what is that? So the Eibishter himself is going to go to battle. This is the Eitzah of the Melech that he's ready to give to us. He's going to come to battle with us, and he's going to reveal his level of Tzvois. That through our Aveda, we're able to touch and reach into the very essence and atzmus of the Melech, the Melech, which is, so to speak, even higher than the life of the Melech. In other words, there's the Eibishter, and then there's the atzmus of the Eibishter, and then there's even higher. This answers all your questions from earlier. This is the Eitzah that the Eibishter is ready to splurge, to give to us, if we are ready to do that within ourselves. And that's where the Eibishter is ready to give up everything, so to speak. He's ready to be Megala, reveal all the highest levels, which till now he didn't see fit to reveal. Okay, and that's, then he finishes off. I'm just going over an hour, I'll do it quick. That leads to the building of Yerushalayim. As we said earlier, Netzach is Binyan Yerushalayim. And Binyan Yerushalayim Beruchnius, How? By our avodah being Shleimus Hayira. And afterwards, what even more significantly importantly is not just building Yerushalayim Beruchin, is building up our Yerushalayim within us, which is our Yira and our Mesiras Nefesh. But more importantly is being Yerushalayim Kipshuta. And Yerushalayim, to build it not just a regular building, but it should be a way of Prozeh station of Yerushalayim. It should be able to be expanding and open and free. Tzidkas Pirzeinek, as we said earlier. Because it comes after and it comes as a result of the Eibusha dispersed us between all the nations. Why did the Eibusha disperse us amongst all the nations? In order to to fight the war of the Eibusha. So that's the meaning of this Gemara that we recorded earlier from Psachim, that the Eibusha did a tzedek, that it disperses amongst the nations, because there's a mission, there's a purpose. Otherwise, how are we going to go and change the world? How are we going to go and make a dinner with Achtein? We need to have a golos. We need to go out into the world. And what are we going to use? The tool, Midas HaNetzach. And Midas HaNetzach is connected with the name of Tzvois. And it's rooted in Atzvos Shlomayla. So he's giving a summary of the whole Maimer just in these 5 lines. So he wants us to go out, and over there we should use Midas HaNetzach. Midas HaNetzach is connected to the name of Tzvois. Tzvois is the name, the Atzvos Shlomayla. And then as a result of that, as a result of that, we're going to see the fruition of Malchus Beis David being rebuilt. That he, David, and Malchus Beis David is going to bring about the Gula Mitzvah Shlema, to the extent and to the point where it will be fulfilled, the promise of a Nigla Kvedavaya, the Kved of the Eibishter will be revealed. That is the ultimate Bizbuz Eitzidus, that the Eibishter should be revealed. That never happened before. The Eibishter revealed himself to Moshe Rabbeinu by the burning bush. The Eibishter spoke to Levim, spoke to the Ovis. Matan Torah was the greatest amount of Gil, Beis Hamikdash. But the Nigla Kved Hashem and Kol Basa Yachdav, that's the ultimate Bizmuz Eitzidus. That's what we're aiming for. And it will be V'hoisal Hashem Amlucha B'Karev Mamash B'Meher B'Yameinu Mamash.
Shkoyach.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.